Hello and welcome to our lecture titled Project Life Cycles. Now, this is an unofficial list of project life cycles. Projects begin with enthusiasm, move on to disillusionment, then panic, followed by the phase of searching for the guilty, punishment of the innocent, and then concluding with praise and honor for the non-participants. That's from Nick Graham's book, Project Management for Dummies, and I'm happy to say that that is not the correct project life cycle. In fact, project life cycles, all projects, large or small, pass through these four stages. Conceptualization, where you develop the initial goal and technical specifications. Planning, where we detail out the plans, the schedule, the schematics, the key dates, and so forth. The execution, where we think of the work of the project is performed, and then termination, where the project is completed, resources are reallocated, it's handed off to the customer, and lessons are learned as the project is closed out. For small projects, this life cycle may be a few days or a few weeks. For very large projects, like some of the examples in the book, these projects can take years, but they follow this same phase, and it's worth talking about these stages a little bit. This figure is from our book. You can see it shows that there's no timeline here across the bottom. We don't know if this is a week, a month, a year, or 5 years. But we know that there is 4 stages involved: conceptualization, planning, execution, and termination. And we also can see on the vertical axis that man hours, time, and effort are charted there. And conceptualization and planning are relatively small compared to execution, and even the wrapping up of the project, the termination of the project, has more energy, man hours, time hours spent into it than conceptualization and planning do. But those initial 2 phases are very important in our life cycle. Conceptualization, this is where we develop the initial goal and the technical specifications for the project. This involves generating, evaluating, and framing the business need for the project and the general approach for how we're going to achieve it. The scope of the work for the project is specified, and the necessary resources are identified. The outputs from this phase, and every phase has outputs, and that's how you know when those outputs are achieved that you're ready to move on to the next phase. The outputs for the conceptualization phase include written documentation of the needs and the benefits, rough estimates of the time and resources that will be necessary, and an initial list of the people who may be interested in or involved in or affected with the project. We might call these the project stakeholders, the key people involved. Now think about conceptualization this way. You need to get the basic information together. The planning stage will be more difficult if you haven't established, at least in an outline, what the project is, what resources are going to be available, and what constraints are applied to the project, such as key delivery dates or financial constraints. The planning stage, once the project has been outlined, this is where all the detailed specifications, schedules, schematics, I should say, and plans are developed. This is where we put we fill out the skeleton, the plan, the framework for what's going to happen. This stage involves developing a plan to specify the desired results, the work to be done, the timeline in which it's going to occur, the costs and other resources are specified during the planning stage. And the plan also includes how we're going to address project risks, because there's always uncertainties and variables in our project, and we should identify those up front in the plan as well. The outputs from the planning stage include a project plan document that specifies the intended project results, the time, the resources, the supporting activities. These and the key deliverable dates are included in that project plan documentation. When we've got it planned out, we know the big picture in detail, we're ready to move on to the execution phase. This is where the main work is performed. And I say that, if I could put quotes around it, I would, because conceptualization and planning is also very important work. I'll say something about that again here in another slide. But this is what we think of as work. This is the actual building of something, the changing of something. It's not the planning of what we're going to do, but here we're actually doing what we've planned. This stage involves performing that planned work, monitoring the progress of the work, controlling the adherence to the plan. And for longer projects, there's planning involved as we're going through the execution, because as we're moving along, especially with longer projects that last months or longer, there's a need to, we can't be so specific in our plans that far in advance, so we have to deliver and then plan again and deliver and plan again. That process is a little bit iterative there. The outputs from execution when we're done with this is that we, or as we're progressing through it as well, is we're creating these progress reports, financial reports, and further detailed plans as we're doing this, and we have in our hands, as we get to the end of the execution, we actually have the product that we've been working on. The last phase of our life cycle, the fourth phase, is termination. This is when the project gets transferred to the customer, the result of our project. The resources that have been allocated to the project, they get reassigned to new projects. Lessons are learned. We reflect back and step back and analyze what we did well, what we could do better in the future, and the project is formally closed out. This stage involves assessing the process, the results. It involves getting the customer approval on the product, that it's meeting the customer's goals, that the customer is satisfied. And again, customer can be internal within the organization. This might be a process within our organization to make our organization better, or it might be a project to develop a new good or service outside of our organization. So customer there can be internal or external. Part of termination is closing out the financial accounts, making sure that everything's been budgeted and accounted for in that way, and the post-project evaluation. How did we do? What did we learn? So the outputs, I think I already mentioned these. A final report, the accepted and approved project results from the customer, recommendations on how to do things better in the future. This figure shows the change in intensity levels for 5 different components over the life of a project. You can't run at full speed all the time. You'll burn out, and there's natural ebbs and flows in any kind of activity over time. When it comes to a project's lifetime, we can see some changes. So for example, the client interest, the person we're doing this for, internal or external, we start a project because there's some excitement about that. And you can see that at the beginning, during the conceptual phase, early in the timeline, on the left-hand side of the timeline, the client interest line is very high, but then it has a U shape where it drops during the planning, execution, the middle stages. The client interest, the intensity, the interest drops. But as we get to the end of the phase and the project is wrapping up and we have something to show the customer, the interest grows again. So then we have that U-shaped curve for client interest. The project stake, this is talking about the corporate investment in the project. The project stake, you can see, starts off low during the conceptualization, low intensity early on in planning, and as we start executing, which requires resources, that's where the bulk of the resources occur during the execution phase, we see that the project stake increases. And as we move through the execution phase, the project stake continues to increase, and during termination, again, done properly, that takes company resources as well. So the project stake increases. So early on in a project, we can spend some time and plan, conceptualize and plan a project without being too vested in it. But as we move through it, it becomes a much bigger commitment. Resources are also allocated most heavily in the execution phase. Because there's more people involved, more work being done during the conceptualization and planning phase, there are resources from the organization involved, but they tend to be fewer, more strategic resources. And the resources go down once the bulk of the execution is done. The termination involves fewer organizational resources. And then the creativity and the uncertainty, if we look at those, you'll see that creativity, this is the degree of innovation required by the project, especially during the development phase, but creativity is actually very high throughout the entire project. Remember that the project is different than process management. Process is about doing what the company does, making colored sugar water, which is what Coca-Cola does and does it very well. There's not a lot of creativity involved. There's minor improvements, but you're basically doing the same thing. Everything involved in a project has high creativity. We can see that the intensity level is, moderate to high throughout the entire process. The other thing to notice about creativity is at its highest as we're actually doing the project. Making this thing happen, we're breaking new ground with it, and that actually is, it's counter-cyclical. It's opposite of the client interest. So as the creativity peaks during the middle phases, that's when the client interest is actually going counterproductive. So it just shows that all of these intensity levels, they all vary over time, and everybody's not running at maximum speed at all time, and that's good because you couldn't maintain your highest, most productive output 45 hours a week, 5 days a week all the time, 50 weeks out of the year. Everybody would burn out and it couldn't happen. Uncertainty starts off high, this last element, and decreases as we go. We start off, we've never done this before, we don't have any idea. Even as we conceptualize and plan, there's still a lot of uncertainty because we haven't had the rubber meets the road, the detailed fleshing out of the plans. As we do that during execution, uncertainty continues to decrease as the client sees the product and is happy with it, and we wrap it up. Uncertainty decreases even more. Now, I don't believe this is in our book, but I thought this was useful, and I wanted to talk about the idea that we should resist the temptation to cut corners. And I want to talk about 3 ways that you might be tempted to cut corners. First of all is getting started with the work phase, right? The implementation phase too quickly. Since implementation is work, and we think, well, I really want to get this done, let's jump right in. Now, that's a fallacy because execution phase, that is not the implementation phase. That is not the only time during which work is being done. Conceptualization and planning is work, and it's important work. There's an old proverb that says, measure twice, cut once. And that proverb reminds us that good planning can help avoid wasted time and effort and wasted material. If you jump into the execution phase and you skip over the conceptualization and planning phase, it's very hard once people are doing work to go back and say, well, let's think about this. Is there a completely different or better way of doing this? Should we be trying to achieve different goals and so on? So I encourage you to avoid cutting corners and missing those first 2 phases. They are important. I also encourage you, as another way that you might be tempted to cut corners, is to not keep up with the progress, especially when you're in that middle phase, when you're doing the work. To say, oh, everybody knows what they're supposed to do. They've got their schedules. They've got their agenda. I'm going to trust them to get their work done. They've got a deliverable in 2 weeks, and they'll be fine. In a perfect world, projects will run smoothly and always go the way they are planned. However, we don't live in a perfect world. Your project doesn't live in a perfect world. There's a need for some flexibility. So, for example, you may have a key project team member may leave the organization or become sick or have some personal issues. There's no warning on that, and that can change the way things are working. Or new technology may emerge that is more appropriate for this project and the use of this project than what was in the original plan. Or perhaps the whole business environment changes and the organization has a whole change in its market strategy, which could change the perspective on what we're doing here. A key to project success is being proactive. Get in front and stay in front of the project. That way you can direct where it's going. The old saying, if a snowball's rolling down a hill, it's better to go alongside it and to help direct it than it is to get run over by it. Or if you're leading, it's better to be in the front rather than chasing from behind. I mean, those are almost opposite analogies, but it's the same idea. You want to stay in control. In both places, you want to control where things are going rather than being trying to react to it. You don't want to be in the mode of putting out fires because you didn't see the problems coming. You want to stay on top of things so that you can be in a proactive mode, not a reactive mode. Failure to monitor progress and keep your plan up to date can seriously jeopardize your project's success. And then in that last phase, not completing the closing stage, not completing the wrap-up, that would be a mistake as well. You may think you're saving some time, but you're not. At the end of one project, there's pressure to move on very quickly to the next project. Resources are scarce, deadlines are looming. We're in there's an impression of let's move on to the next project. Let's be innovative. Let's be creative. And that creates a pressure to move on without properly wrapping up and concluding the existing project. But if you do that, you're missing out on a lot of opportunities. You really need to make sure that everything is finished properly and handed over so that the lessons learned will not be lost within the organization. You need to make sure that the project has achieved what it was set out to do, and that your organization has embraced the results, the knowledge, the wisdom gained during this process, and that you've learned lessons, good or bad, from this project for future projects so that you can be more effective as you move forward. So summary points for this presentation, I have 2 summary points. First, a project has a life cycle during which it passes through 4 phases: conceptualization, planning, execution, and termination. And the intensity levels of these projects, they're going to vary as the project progresses through the life cycles.